He was two people. That's the only way to understand it. There was the one the world saw. The one on the television, the one on the movie screen, the one with the lip curl and the swiveling hips. That was the invention, that was the product, that was the man who sold 1 million records and then 10 million and then 100 million. He was sex and rebellion rolled into one package. He was dangerous, he made parents nervous and teenagers scream. He was a bolt of lightning in the quiet, gray 1950s, and later he was the king in the white jumpsuit, a living god in Las Vegas, commanding the stage with a karate chop and a sly grin. That was Elvis. But there was another one, the one few people really knew. That was the boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, the one who grew up poor in a 2-room shotgun shack. That was the boy who loved his mother, Gladys, with a devotion that bordered on worship. This was the boy who found God not in a quiet, sterile cathedral, but in a loud, sweaty, foot-stomping Assembly of God church. This was the man who, when the lights went down and the crowds went home, found his peace not in rock and roll, but in the old gospel hymns he learned as a child. That was Elvis too, and these two men lived in the same body. They were always at war. The sinner and the saint, the showman and the seeker, the man who sang about being a teddy bear, and the man who sang about the hands of Jesus. For most of his life, he managed to keep them in separate rooms. He could be the rocker on stage, and then go backstage and sing, "How Great Thou Art," with his backup singers until dawn. He kept a fragile peace between his two selves. The fans, they understood this too, in their own way. They were also two groups. There were the rock and roll fans, they bought the 45, screamed at the concerts, and loved the swagger. They wanted the rebel. Then there were the gospel fans. They were a quieter bunch. They were church-going people, conservatives, people from his own background in the South. They bought his gospel albums like His Hand in Mine and How Great Thou Art. In fact, the only Grammy Awards he ever won in his lifetime were for his gospel music. 3 of them. Not for Hound Dog, not for Jailhouse Rock, for his hymns. These gospel fans saw the other Elvis. They saw the Tupelo boy. They heard the sincerity in his voice when he sang about the afterlife, about redemption, about a higher power. They felt he was one of them, a believer who just happened to be the most famous man on earth. They looked past the wiggling hips and the Hollywood movies because they believed in his heart he was a good Christian boy. They gave him a kind of grace that the rest of the world did not. They were not just fans, they were a congregation. And he was their most famous, most prodigal son. He cherished their approval. It meant more to him than the screaming teenagers, more than the sold-out arenas. Because it was approval not of the image, but of the soul. It was validation for the part of him that was real, the part that existed before the fame. Losing them would have been like losing his mother all over again. It would have been like being cast out of the only church that ever felt like home. So, you have to understand this fragile balance he was keeping. On one hand, the demands of the pop charts. On the other, the demands of his own soul and the people who saw it. He walked this tightrope for years. He'd release a rock and roll hit, then follow it up with a gospel album. He'd do a wild Vegas show, and then sing Amazing Grace in his hotel suite. He kept the two worlds apart. Then, in 1972, a song came to him. It was written by Dennis Linde, a Nashville songwriter. And it was a great song, not just good, great. It had a driving beat, a killer guitar riff, and an energy that was undeniable. It was a hit. You could hear it just once, and know it was a hit. In an era of mellow folk singers and introspective rock, this song was a blast of pure, unapologetic, joyful noise. It was everything his career needed at that moment. A shot of adrenaline, a reminder to the world that he could still rock harder than anyone. But he listened to the lyrics, and he froze. The problem wasn't that the song was about love, or even about lust. He'd sung about that 1,000 times. That wasn't new. The problem was the specific words it used. The song took the language of the church, the language of his gospel music, the language of his soul, and it twisted it. It used the vocabulary of spiritual ecstasy to describe physical desire. It opens with a line that sounds like it could be a cry from a sinner at a revival meeting. Lord Almighty. It's a phrase of awe, of prayer, of surrender to a higher power. It's what you say when you see a miracle. It's what you say when you feel the Holy Spirit move through you. And it's a sacred phrase, but the song doesn't use it that way. The very next thing he says is, "I feel my temperature rising." The sacred is immediately tied to the profane. The cry to God is answered with a feeling of carnal heat. It was a clever songwriting trick. But to Elvis, it might as well have been a stick of dynamite placed at the foundation of his two worlds. It got worse. The lyrics talk about a fever, about flames, about smoke. This is the imagery of hellfire and brimstone. It's the language preachers use to warn their flock about the wages of sin. The Bible is full of fire. The burning bush, the pillar of fire, the fires of damnation. Fire is a powerful spiritual symbol. And this song, It uses fire to describe lust. The fever isn't from sickness, it's from desire. The flames aren't from God or the devil, they're from a woman's kiss. The entire song is built on this metaphor love as a consuming, burning, feverish inferno. He was supposed to sing, "I'm just a hunk of burning love. A hunk of burning love." Think about that from the perspective of his gospel fans, the people who bought How Great Thou Art, the people who listened to him sing He Touched Me. They believed in a love that was pure, divine, and eternal, a love that saved your soul. Now the same man, with the same voice, was going to sing about a hunk of burning love. It sounded cheap, it sounded like a parody, it felt like he was mocking the very thing and he held sacred. It was a collision he had spent his entire career avoiding. He wasn't just singing about being a bad boy. He was using the language of the good boy to do it. It was a line he had never crossed. His rock and roll songs were about girls and cars and dancing. His gospel songs were about God and salvation. They stayed in their lanes. This song drove a truck right through the median. He was terrified. The story goes that he didn't want to record it. He pushed back. He told his producers, his band, that it wasn't for him. It wasn't just a matter of taste. It was a deep spiritual discomfort. He could picture the faces of the people in the pews back in Tupelo. He could hear the disappointment in their voices. He could imagine them thinking he was a hypocrite. That his faith was just another part of the act. That the man they thought they knew, the believer, was a fraud. This wasn't an abstract fear. It was personal. J.D. Sumner, the legendary gospel-based singer who sang with Elvis for years, was his friend and a father figure. The Stamps Quartet, his backup group, were all men from the gospel world. These were his people. He had to stand in a studio and sing these words in front of them. He had to look these men of God in the eye and sing a line that felt, to him, almost blasphemous. Why did he do it? Pressure. Pure and simple. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, saw a hit. The record label, RCA, saw a hit. His last big top 10 single had been a couple of years earlier. In the fast-moving world of pop music, that was an eternity. He needed to be relevant. He needed to prove he was still the king. The machine around him was too powerful. The need for a hit, for continued success, for the money to fund his massive entourage and lifestyle was a powerful force. It was a force that could make a man compromise, it could make a man sing a song he didn't want to sing. So, he went into the studio, he still wasn't happy about it. He reportedly got so frustrated during the recording sessions that he threw his lyric sheet on the floor. He felt ridiculous singing the lines, it didn't feel like him, not the real him. But then, something happened. Because he was Elvis Presley, he was a professional. More than that, he was a genius interpreter of songs. When the tape rolled, he put his doubts aside and he performed. And he didn't just sing the song, he attacked it. He poured all that pent-up energy, all that frustration into the vocal. You can hear it in the recording. There's a manic, almost desperate power in his voice. He's pushing, straining, giving it everything he has. He's not just singing about a fever, he sounds like he's in the middle of one. The result was magic. It was one of the greatest rock and roll performances of his entire career. It was raw, wild, and completely alive. It was the sound of the 50s revelry emerging from within the 70s superstar. The song was released, and it was a monster. It shot up the charts. It was his biggest hit in years. It was everywhere. It became a song that defined his final years for many people. The definitive sound of the jumpsuit era. And what about his gospel fans? Did they abandon him? For the most part, no. The world had changed since the 1950s. People were more willing to accept the contradictions in their idols. The culture was more fragmented. You could like an artist for one thing and ignore another. His gospel fans kept buying the gospel albums, the rock fans loved the new hit. The two worlds, which he feared would collide and destroy each other, mostly just kept spinning in their separate orbits. He had given them the grace of seeing his true self, and they gave it back to him. They forgave him this one perceived transgression. They knew his heart, and they knew this was just a song. But the fear was real, the conflict was real. It tells you everything you need to know about him. The world saw the king of rock and roll, a man who seemed to fear nothing. But inside, he was still that boy from Tupelo, worried about what the church folks would think. He was worried about disappointing the people who saw his soul, not just his suit. He was afraid of losing the only part of his life that felt truly pure. He worried that by singing about a fever in his body, he would make them forget that his deepest desire was to sing about the fire in his soul. The song, of course, was Burning Love.